A wide review of the Israel-Hamas war now. Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin meeting yesterday as that war rages on. The two leaders have been critical of Israel's handling of the crisis and have called for a ceasefire. Putin put a ceasefire toward the UN Security Council. It was rejected. This comes as President Biden is in Israel to pledge U.S. support. Critics Putin and Xi are moving to undercut the United States and our allies as the whole world watches. Former UN ambassador and Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley out with a new op-ed. The headline, "Wake up, America. Our enemies are an evil alliance taking advantage of our weaknesses around the world." James Carafano, the Heritage Foundation VP of National Security and Foreign Policy and retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, joins us now. James, with enemies all around and new alliances forming, if ever there was a time to show American strength, this would be it.
Right. So I think you're really right to kind of focus on the bigger picture here. I mean, we all talk about Hamas, but Hamas is a tool of Iran, and Iran and Russia and China all have one thing in common. They all want a diminished America, and they absolutely want a degraded and removed American presence in the Middle East. So these guys are the real enemy. You know, we're never going to solve the problem of Hamas unless we deal with its master, which is Iran. So we have an administration that has been engaging with Iran because they want them to be quiet until after the election. That is more than enough to set up this kind of backslap from the Iranians against the United States. Then we have the Russians who want the Middle East inflamed, as they want Africa inflamed. We've had 7 coups in just the last 2 years in Africa because they want that to distract and diminish U.S. and NATO focus and attention on Ukraine. And China really, let's be honest, China's just sitting back and they just want to kind of pick up the pieces. You know, the Chinese actually engaged a lot with the Israelis. They really wanted to kind of pull them away from the United States. They've engaged everybody, the Saudis, everybody, right? But their client state in the region is Iran. And in the end of the day, they want Iran to come in on top. So the Chinese are perfectly happy to sit back and kind of pick up the pieces. But today, if you are in Tehran or you're in Moscow or in Beijing, you only want one thing. You want Israel to be as weakened as possible in this war, and you want the United States to be humiliated, because then you can start to walk in and pick up the pieces.
I thought it was kind of rich for Russia to be calling for a ceasefire at the UN Security Council, given what it's been doing in Ukraine. But when it comes to Iran, this president again said in that 60 Minutes interview on Sunday night that there is no direct evidence linking Iran to this horrible terrorist attack that was carried out on October the 7th. There may not be any direct evidence at this point, James, but we do have a law in the United States that if you give material support to a terrorist group, you are as guilty as they are. Why isn't the president pulling the trigger on that?
Well, so we have two issues going on here. Not only do we have Iran's direct support to Hamas, and actually plenty of evidence to show not only collusion, but planning. But we also have the Iranians pushing Hezbollah very hard to open a second front. This creates, you know, the most dangerous nightmare scenario here is that Iran wants a two-front war. They want Israel to be taken down a peg or two, the United States to be, as its client, to be humiliated. And that's the perfect time for Iran to declare a nuclear breakout, just as Biden is going into his election cycle, and then to present the president, whoever they are in the second term, with the fait accompli that here is Iran as a nuclear state. That's the nightmare scenario. And here you have the Biden administration really trapped with a one-track policy, which is going to be, we're going to keep Iran quiet by engaging with them. And not only has that policy failed, but demonstrably it's led to this war. And you have a president who now finds himself absolutely, totally committed to having to support the Israelis, but to admit that he fundamentally helped cause this, and that by not going after Iran, he's not really dealing with the problem. That's a bridge too far for this administration. So they're really kind of caught in the middle here.
Yeah. And I imagine that they'll continue to stand by the status quo as it comes to Iran because they really want to try to get back into a nuclear deal. James Carafano, good to get your thoughts. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.